Imagine, for a second, that you could just set up a toll booth. But, you aren't placing this toll booth on a highway or a bridge or a busy street. You're placing it on an entire country's economy.
Right, like on literally everything.
Exactly. Every single time this massive nation needs to build a skyscraper or pave a road or manufacture a car, they have to hand you a tiny, almost invisible fraction of a penny.
It honestly sounds like the plot of a geopolitical thriller or something, like a systemic drain that a villain installs in a cyberpunk novel.
Yeah, it really does. But when you multiply that tiny fraction by billions of tons of raw materials, well, it stops being fiction. It starts becoming one of the most fascinating economic models you could ever look at.
Which brings us to today's deep dive. We are unpacking this viral social media post that lays out a schematic for exactly this kind of operation.
Right. The post alleges massive systemic corruption at the absolute highest levels of China's national leadership, specifically targeting the family of Xi Jinping.
And before we go any further, we really need to set an extremely clear framework for this deep dive.
Yeah, that's crucial.
Our mission today is not to endorse these claims. We aren't verifying them, and we are certainly not taking political sides here.
Right. We're treating this viral post purely as a blueprint.
Exactly. We just want to use it to understand the mechanics of how these types of allegations are constructed in the first place. We're looking at it as a theoretical model of modern globalized corruption.
Just looking at the how and the why of the machine that this post describes. And we're doing this because the sheer scale of the numbers mentioned in these sources is just staggering.
I mean, we are talking about billions of tons of raw materials here.
Yeah, and tens of billions of dollars in seized cryptocurrency. It's a masterclass in macroeconomic skimming, at least in theory.
And to understand a machine of that size, we really have to start with the simplest gear.
Okay, so where does the source material begin?
It starts with a very specific domestic allegation involving iron ore. This kind of serves as the foundation of the whole alleged scheme. Let's just break down the math exactly as the post lays it out.
Sounds good.
So imagine you have Australian iron ore, right? And the going market rate is $100 per ton.
Okay, a pretty standard commodity price.
Right. But the post claims that a family member, specifically naming Yang Lonan, sets up a shell company. And this shell company acts as a mandatory middleman. Every single ton of iron ore that China needs must be purchased through this specific company.
Wow, so it creates a perfectly enclosed funnel.
Exactly. There is literally no alternative route for the supply chain. The buyer cannot go directly to the source in Australia.
And because they control that funnel, they just add a markup. The post says it's just $5 per ton.
Right, and on a $100 ton of iron ore, $5 doesn't sound like a world-ending premium.
It really doesn't. But, the scale changes everything. The Post claims that China procures 1.1 billion tons of iron ore annually.
Just let that number sink in for a second. 1.1 billion tons.
It's hard to even picture. But if you take that $5 markup and you multiply by 1.1 billion, that is $5.5 billion in pure net profit every single year.
And the author of the post ironically calls this a small business for iron ore.
A small business.
Yeah.
It's like a mandatory ticket scalper at the gates of an inescapable concert. You can't just choose not to buy iron ore. You have to build, so you pay the scalper.
Yeah, and what is so fascinating here is the psychological trick of the pricing.
What do you mean?
Well, if you try to double the price of iron ore, the global market reacts. Supply chains fracture, competitors step in, inflation spikes noticeably.
All right, people would definitely notice.
Exactly. But a 5% markup blends perfectly into the noise of a spreadsheet.
That makes sense.
In the grand scheme of heavy industry, a 5% fluctuation can easily be written off internally as shipping costs, administrative fees, or just standard market volatility.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit, though, because this is where my brain hits a roadblock.
Sure. What is it?
The Post itself notes that all the steel factories in China are state-owned enterprises, centralized government-run businesses.
Right.
So if a state-owned factory is suddenly bleeding an extra $5.5 billion a year to some random middleman company, wouldn't somebody in the government notice? Like, an accountant somewhere would raise a red flag about a multi-billion-dollar leak in their own books, right?
Well, that assumes a separation of powers that exists in Western corporate governance,
Yeah.
where the state auditors are completely independent of the ruling family.
Ah, I see.
The implicit logic of this social media post is that the buyer, the state-owned enterprise, and the middleman are controlled by the exact same centralized power structure.
So they are basically auditing themselves.
Exactly. When the absolute top of the political pyramid controls the auditing department, the regulatory agencies, and the shell company, the concept of blowing the whistle just disappears.
Because the person you would report the crime to works for the person committing the crime.
You got it. The leak isn't a flaw in the accounting system. The leak is the system.
Wow.
The state-owned enterprise absorbs the inflated cost, effectively subsidizing the shell company using state funds.
Right.
To the factory manager on the ground, the price of iron ore is just a directive from above. They don't question the $5 premium because questioning the supply chain means questioning the supreme leadership.
That makes sense in a terrifyingly efficient kind of way. You have this domestic vacuum cleaner just sucking up billions of dollars.
Right.
But, I mean, accumulating $5.5 billion domestically creates a massive logistical headache. You can't just wire that into a standard checking account or stuff it in a briefcase.
No, definitely not.
You have to clean it, and you have to move it internationally without setting off alarms.
And this is exactly where the allegations shift from domestic skimming to international evasion. It targets the lifeblood of the global economy, which is the oil trade.
Okay, so how does that work?
The Post divides its allegations into two distinct strategies, focusing on Venezuela and Iran. Let's look at Venezuela first.
All right.
The claim is that oil prices from Venezuela are artificially inflated, similar to the iron ore markup. But the key detail is how they actually pay for it.
How so?
The Post states that they use barter systems to avoid using the U.S. dollar, specifically to evade tracking by SWIFT.
So I think most people just see SWIFT as the thing that takes 5 days to wire money to a relative overseas.
Right, but it's fundamentally a messaging network. When a bank in Beijing sends money to a bank in Caracas, they don't physically move cash.
They just send a secure message through SWIFT, adjusting their ledgers.
Exactly. And because the U.S. dollar is the world's reserve currency, almost all major international oil trades are priced and settled in dollars.
Which means they have to route through U.S. correspondent banks.
Yes, which means the United States government has an incredible amount of visibility into those transactions.
So if you are trying to hide billions in inflated commodity trades, SWIFT acts like a massive spotlight.
It creates a permanent, auditable digital paper trail of exactly who paid who and how much. To turn off that spotlight, the Post claims they use barter.
Now, to bypass SWIFT, using barter sounds kind of crazy at first.
It does.
I mean, you can't trade millions of barrels of crude oil like baseball cards on a playground. How does bartering actually work at a nation-state level?
Well, if you think about it, China has something Venezuela desperately needs, which is infrastructure. So they are essentially swapping deep water ports for oil tankers to keep cash completely off the grid.
That is wild.
Nation-state bartering is incredibly complex, but it is highly effective for evasion. Imagine China needs 10 million barrels of oil.
Okay.
Instead of sending $1 billion through the SWIFT network, China agrees to build a new deep-water port in Venezuela, where they ship thousands of high-tech solar panels or military equipment.
So they just peg the value of the infrastructure to the value of the oil.
Exactly, but no hard currency ever crosses a border.
So it bypasses the global banking system entirely, creating this dark pool of trade. Western regulators sitting in Washington or Brussels look at the financial ledgers and see absolutely nothing.
Precisely. Then the Post brings up Iran, which requires a different approach entirely because Iran is under some of the most severe financial sanctions on the planet.
Right, you can't just casually trade with Iran.
No. The Post claims that for Iranian oil, 0 U.S. dollars are used. None.
Really? 0?
0. Instead, the trades are calculated using Chinese RMB, cryptocurrency, and again, mixed with barter.
And this is where one of the commenters on the Post chimes in with a detail that just changes the scale of everything we've talked about.
Oh yeah, this part is huge.
They claim that the oil is bought from these sanctioned countries for as little as $18 a barrel. But then it is sold to Sinopec, China's state-owned oil giant, for $100 a barrel.
That is an $82 delta on a single barrel of oil.
Just think about how many millions of barrels of oil a country like China consumes every single day. The commenter literally says, think about how many barrels of oil China imports a year. This is sky-high corruption.
It makes the iron ore numbers look like pocket change.
It really does.
We need to look closely at how that $82 delta actually moves, because this is where the mechanics get incredibly sophisticated.
Okay, walk me through it.
Sinopec, the state-owned buyer, is directed to buy oil at $100 a barrel. They pay a designated middleman shell company.
Right.
But here's the trick. Sinopec pays in Chinese RMB. Because it's a domestic transfer using local currency, it stays entirely within the Chinese banking system.
Oh, wow. So the U.S. has zero jurisdiction or visibility over domestic Chinese banking transfers.
Exactly. The middleman shell company now holds a massive amount of RMB. They facilitate the actual acquisition of the Iranian oil.
And the Iranian seller receives the equivalent of $18 a barrel.
Right, likely handled through those untraceable barter arrangements we talked about, or a closed-loop RMB transfer that never touches a Western correspondent bank.
Leaving the shell company sitting on an $82 profit margin for every single barrel.
Yep.
But they are sitting on it in domestic RMB. To actually utilize that kind of wealth globally, they need to convert it into a frictionless, borderless asset.
And that is where cryptocurrency enters the picture. It acts as the ultimate liquidity tool. The shell companies can convert those domestic RMB profits into digital assets.
Which is crazy because you can move hundreds of millions of dollars worth of Bitcoin or Tether from a wallet in Hong Kong to a wallet in Dubai in roughly 10 minutes.
Exactly. There is no central bank to freeze the transaction, no SWIFT message to intercept. It allows these actors to settle the balances of these massive oil trades instantaneously, completely outside the traditional financial architecture.
So we have the iron ore monopoly squeezing the domestic market, and we have these untraceable dark pools of oil trading using barter, RMB, and crypto to launder the margins.
Right.
Which brings us to the natural consequence of trying to move that much wealth through the shadows. What happens when a piece of that infrastructure collapses?
Well, the source material introduces a massive claim about the scale of the enforcement. The Post names a specific figure, a man referred to as fraudster Chen Qi from the Prince Group.
And the Post explicitly mentions a rumor that this individual is actually Xi Jinping's illegitimate son. Right.
Yes, exactly. Now, whether that rumor has any truth to it or not, the critical part of the blueprint is the alleged consequence.
Okay.
The Post alleges that a staggering $15 billion in cryptocurrency was seized by the United States.
$15 billion.
Yes.
Seized in a single digital wallet. I mean, that represents a massive logistical failure for the shadow economy. You don't hold that kind of liquidity unless it's required to settle sovereign-level oil trades or warehouse the profits of an entire national import scheme.
Exactly. And the author of the Post frames the seizure not just as a random law enforcement bust, but as a geopolitical message.
A warning.
Right. They write that the seizure of the crypto is a warning that Big Brother is always watching you. It's the U.S. flexing its cyber muscles, proving that even in the dark pools of crypto, they can still dismantle the architecture.
It's funny because everyone thinks cryptocurrency is an invisible cloak, but really it's a glass safe. Yes, there's no name attached to the digital wallet, but every single transaction is permanently burned into a public ledger, the blockchain.
Right, exactly.
So if Western intelligence agencies connect one single IP address or one real-world purchase to that specific wallet, the whole anonymous house of cards just collapses.
They don't even need a bank subpoena to seize it. They utilize chain analysis to trace the flow of funds from the initial conversion of RMB all the way to the holding wallet.
And once they identify the vulnerability and obtain the private keys, they can drain the asset instantly.
Exactly. It highlights the ultimate vulnerability of this entire scheme. You can bypass the correspondent banks, you can use shell companies, but trying to hide $15 billion on a public mathematical ledger exposes you to state-level cyber operations.
And the Post paints a picture of a system so vast that it bleeds into everything. After laying out the detailed mechanics for iron ore and oil, the author essentially throws her hands up and says, and as for soybeans, wheat, just use your imagination.
The implication being that the $5 toll booth we examined earlier has been installed on virtually every essential commodity entering the country.
Right.
If you have the central authority to force the entire national steel industry to use a specific middleman, extending that same model to agricultural imports is just a matter of copy and paste.
This actually brings us to the author's final and arguably most cynical conclusion.
Oh yeah, the black eating black part.
Exactly. They ask, is Xi Jinping fighting corruption? And then they answer their own question by saying it's essentially black eating black, which translates to criminals robbing criminals, just so they can swallow it all themselves.
Right.
I look at it like a mob boss moving into a new city. The boss immediately starts cleaning the streets, taking out all the local gangs, shutting down the rival rackets.
To the public, it looks like he's bringing law and order.
Exactly. He's a hero. But the reality is, he's just clearing the board so he can establish a total uncontested monopoly on the crime.
The Post is arguing that these massive anti-corruption purges aren't about establishing the rule of law. They are about consolidating the revenue streams.
Consolidating the toll booths.
Yes. If an autocratic regime is running a multi-billion-dollar skimming operation on national imports, the absolute last thing they can tolerate is lower-level bureaucrats taking their own unauthorized cuts.
It ruins the efficiency of the machine.
You cannot have petty thieves stealing the cargo when you are busy stealing the whole ship.
That is a great way to put it. When we think of corruption, we are culturally conditioned to imagine briefcases stuffed with $100 bills, secret Swiss bank accounts, or back alley bribes.
The Hollywood version of corruption.
Yeah, exactly.
But what this source material lays out, and again, evaluated purely as a theoretical blueprint, is a total evolution of that concept.
Right.
It has moved from the briefcase to the macroeconomic supply chain. It is the integration of illicit skimming directly into the legitimate mechanics of global trade.
The corruption is no longer a localized event. It is baked into the pricing of the commodities that drive the global economy.
Yes.
And you might be wondering, why should you, the listener, care about the mechanics of a theoretical shell company moving Venezuelan oil or Australian iron ore?
Well, because we live in an intensely interconnected global economy.
Exactly. If a major world power is allegedly utilizing dark pools, bartering infrastructure for energy, and maintaining multi-billion-dollar crypto wallets to evade international sanctions and centralize wealth, that impacts the global price of everything.
It impacts the inflation of basic commodities, the effectiveness of Western foreign policy, and the underlying stability of global markets.
Let's just quickly recap the three main pillars of this alleged machine we've explored today. First, we have the forced monopoly middleman, like the iron ore example, where a subtle markup scales into billions of dollars in profit through sheer centralized volume.
Second, we have the financial evasion tactics, the use of Venezuelan and Iranian oil, sovereign infrastructure bartering, and closed-loop RMB systems to effectively bypass the U.S. dollar and the SWIFT monitoring network entirely.
Right. And finally, we have the astronomical scale of the consequences. The claim of a $15 billion crypto seizure by the U.S. due to blockchain vulnerability, and the underlying philosophy that state-run anti-corruption campaigns might simply be a mechanism for monopolizing the graft.
And as we established at the beginning, we maintain a strictly evaluative stance on these specific viral claims. We aren't here to declare this specific social media post as undeniable truth.
Definitely not.
But as a case study, as a detailed blueprint for how modern sovereign-level corruption could theoretically operate, it demands that we think bigger. It asks us to stop looking for the briefcase of cash and start looking at the sprawling ledgers of state-owned enterprises.
We live in an era where everything feels relentlessly tracked. Every coffee you buy pings your banking app. Every website you visit leaves a digital footprint.
That's for sure.
We are constantly told that the global economy is monitored, audited, and strictly regulated. But consider this. If you really wanted to hide a mountain of illicit wealth, maybe you wouldn't try to shrink it down to make it invisible.
What do you mean?
Maybe, just maybe, the absolute largest transactions on Earth, billions of tons of national imports, are actually the easiest places to hide. Not because they are invisible, but because the numbers are simply too massive and the toll booth too incredibly large for the average human mind to even comprehend.
경주 땅 달빛 아래 홀로 앉아서 지당隔壁라로 왔나在轻柔的月光下我独自坐着望着长安的方向低头叹息为了那头一的梦借来了别人 당나라 광복 입고 고개 숙이며传奇唐朝的官府深深低下头，表面是三寒的主，实则是打工的人送去了金银珠宝，换来了册封御书。这千年的荣华背后，藏着多少苦？세월은 흘러가도 하는 남았네. 岁月流逝，当那愤恨落下来，在强大的影子里，我们卑微的喘息。화려한 금관 뒤에 숨겨진 눈물 서글픈 운명이여 이것이 우리의 슬픈 역사라네. 천년의 세월이 흐느껴오네. 누구를 위한 통일인가, 누구를 위한 나라냐. 신라